Various species of mythical headless men were rumored in antiquity and later to inhabit remote parts of the world. They are known as acephaloi, headless ones, or Blemmyes. Blemmyes have been talked about throughout history by many ancient authors. Authors, of course, who have established reputations in mainstream education. One constrained to the modern world view of reality would find believing beings like this once existing in our past very hard to believe. Yet, we receive very detailed descriptions of these peoples, including locations and customs, and they are referenced by multiple cultures from around the world. Now, I want to discuss what I think is going on here, but first, let's take a look at some of these references. One of our first references is from the famous Greek historian Herodotus and his book Histories, which is considered the founding work of history in Western literature, so obviously this book is a really big deal. Quote, "For the eastern region of Libya, which the nomads inhabit, is low-lying and sandy as far as the river Triton, but the land westward of this, where dwell the tillers of the soil, is exceeding hilly and wooded and full of wild beasts. In that country are the huge snakes, and the elephants, and the bears and asps, the horned asses, the dog-headed men, and the headless that have their eyes in their breast, as the Libyans say, and the wild men and women, besides many other creatures not fabulous." End quote. Herodotus is telling us of giant snakes, dogmen, these Blemmyes, and he also brings up Bigfoot, or wild men. Check out our Dogman and Bigfoot video if you haven't seen it, but here we have in one of the most monumental books on history a reference to some fascinating creatures that were once thought to exist. Pliny the Elder, another famous historian, in his Natural History, quote, "The Blemmyes are said to have no heads, their mouths and eyes being seated in their breast." End quote. Most skeptics would say that there must be some rational explanation for this. Some common explanations are that it's nothing but a story, a myth, fantasy. I saw another explanation that was talking about how some tribes in Africa had these specific costumes and giant masks that would go over their entire body and head, giving this cartoonish appearance of having a face for a torso, and the people traveling through this area who relayed this information were mystified and thought that they were real creatures. Now, in my opinion, I don't think it's a fantasy, and I don't think it was just a costume because in Natural Histories, he makes it quite clear that there are other beings as well, such as Hematopods, or a race of people with feet resembling thongs, which they move along the nature with a serpentine crawling kind of gait. There are also beings called Cyapods, or a tribe of one-legged beings with a giant foot. These were primarily Ethiopian or Indian men who would then raise their large feet in the air for shade against a hot southern sun. These were very popular in ancient bestiaries. Quote, he, Theseus, also described a tribe of men in India or Ethiopia called Mononcoli, one-legged, who only have one leg and who move in jumps with surprising speed. The same is called Cyapods or Shadowfoot's tribe because in the hotter weather they lie on their backs on the ground and protect themselves with the shadow of their feet. End quote. Pliny the Elder in Natural Histories also speaks of half-men, half-goat, satyrs, or what he calls Agipan, and he also describes them as real peoples who would devote the night to their amusements of lighting up fires and dancing to the music of drums and cymbals. They weren't stupid, and I think they would realize the difference between a costume because they had many other strange creatures in this realm. Also, I actually don't think they're talking about Africa. Remember, terms have been switched throughout history, and I was reading an online book of natural histories, and in book 5, chapter 1, there is a note talking about how they used to think that Africa was Asia, and that they have no idea how such an error came to be. Seems strange to me, but maybe there's something else going on. I'm sure there are many other modern explanations, such as this being some type of war tactic, but again, I think that these people in the past were far smarter than we are, and even Julius Solinus, a Latin grammarian and geographer, said that they are believed to be born with their head part dismembered, their mouth and eyes deposited on the breast. So it's clear that this is some type of deformity that occurred in humans at least at some point in the past. Headless men also appear in several Asian legends. Breast-eyed races, Warkasmen, are recurrent in the Zoroastrian scriptures as the Bunda Hishin, the Jamasp Namag, and the Jerkat Asurig. Furthermore, the Blemmyes are called breast-eyed or sternophthalmi in Strabo's geography. In the Indian epic Ramayana, the demon Kamada is a headless creature with one eye in the middle of his stomach and with extra long arms. He is cursed to remain in his form until released by Rama. In the Chinese classic text Classic of Mountains and Seas, the god Qingshan is described as having no head, and with his nipples as eyes and his belly button as a mouth. This is because he got decapitated in a battle against Huangdi. The yokai Natsada in the Japanese folklore is depicted as a headless man with his face on his torso. By the 7th or 8th century of our modern timeline, there had been composed a letter of Pharasmanes to Hadrian, whose accounts of marvels such as bearded women and headless men became incorporated into later text. This included De Rebus in Oriente Mirabilis, also known as Mirabilia, its Anglo-Saxon translation, Gervasi of Tilbury's treatise, and the Alexander legend attributed to Leo Archipresbyter. The Latin text in this recension, known as the Fermi's letter, was translated verbatim in Gervasi's of Tilbury's Otia Imperalia, which describes a people without heads of a golden color, measuring 12 feet tall and 7 feet wide, living on the isle in the river Bryzon in Ethiopia. The catalogue of strange peoples from the letter occurs in Anglo-Saxon's Wonder of the East and the Liber Monstrorum. Recensions of both these works are bound in the Beowulf manuscript. The transmissions is imperfect. No name is given to the headless islanders, 8 feet tall in the Wonders of the East. Epifugi is the name of the headless in the Liber Monstrorum. This form derives from Epophagos and a modified recension of the letter of Pharasmanes, known as the letter of Pramonis to Trajan. We also have paintings that depict the encounter between Alexander the Great and these Blemmyes. In the prose Alexander, the golden-colored headless encountered by Alexander measured just 6 feet tall and had beards reaching their knees. In the French version, Alexander captures 30 of the headless to show the rest of the world, an element lacking in the Latin original. So, even Alexander the Great encountered these beings, and we covered this in the Bigfoot Wildman video where basically just like Shrek, they wanted to go out and get rid of all these fantastical beings in our realm. That's what we're seeing in these paintings. Alexander the Great was removing the old magical world. The Travels of Sir John Mandeville writes of, quote, ugly folk without heads who have eyes in each of their shoulders, with their mouths round like a horseshoe in the middle of their chest, living among the populace in the big island of Dundia, Andaman Islands, between India and Myanmar. In other parts of the island are headless men with eyes and mouth on their backs. He doesn't specifically use the term Blemmyes, but it seems like he's describing the exact same being. The Boche de Nature, written by Conrad of Megenberg, described the people without heads as shaggy all over the body with coarse hair like wild animals, but when the printed book versions appeared, their woodcut illustrations depicted them as smooth-bodied, in contradiction to the text. Conrad lumped peoples of various geography under wondermention and condemned such wondrous people as earning physical deformities due to their sins of their ancestors. So there we have it. It's not just some tribal mask outfit, it's not a fantasy, but some type of physical deformity that the ancients believed to be some curse. There are a couple more references I need to go through, but in a moment, I want to discuss a couple of the things that I think are going on here. During the Age of Discovery, a rumor of headless men called the Iwe Panama was reported by Sir Walter Raleigh in the discovery of Guyana to have been living on the banks of the Cora River, and in the story, Raleigh was resolved it is true because every child in the provinces of Aromala and Kanuri affirmed the same. He also cited as anonymous Spaniard sighting of the Iwapanoma. Jonas de Laet, a somewhat later contemporary, dismissed the story, writing that these natives' heads were set so close to the shoulders that some were led to believe that their eyes were attached to the shoulders and the mouth to their breast. During the same period around 1589 to 1600, another English writer, Richard Hakluyt, described a voyage by John Locke to Guinea where he found people without heads, called Blemmyes, having their eyes and mouth in their breast. Ewampanomas were depicted on numerous later maps using Rayleigh's account as a reference. Jodocus Hondius included them in his 1598 chart of Guyana and in his display of various Amerindian peoples in a map of North America released in the same year. So we had these observations of these creatures going up to the 17th century. They are also in modern art, such as with The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. There are 4 giants that are very similar to Blemmyes. Another interesting modern theory is that this was no more than a local trait of having the head set deep in the shoulders. Now, that could be, as there are people who sort of look like this in the modern day. But what if this may be some type of reference to genetic manipulation in the past? I mean, we hear about all these strange creatures talked about by such prestigious men of history. It makes you wonder if maybe these beings truly did exist at some point. There was just some really weird stuff going on back then, and this is exactly why the flood happened according to the Bible. The fallen ones came down and began creating hybrids with the animals. God became upset with the amount of horrible monsters existing in this realm, and so he brought the flood. It could also be that maybe there was a technology in the past for causing such deformities to a local population on purpose, whether that be electrical, chemical, or even physical. Maybe these depictions are proof of some really weird, messed up experiments in the past. This is when we get to what's called the Monstrous Races, and this is a big part of early Christianity. They don't talk about it a lot now, of course, but medieval Christian writers were completely faithful to the belief that monstrous human races lived far beyond the horizon. St. Augustine was the first to reflect on the existence of monstrous human races from the point of view of Christianity. He analyzes the idea whether the monstrous races should be considered the descendants of the first man, Adam, therefore, whether they belong to the human race. Now, remember what I said about technology, because I honestly think that the corrupted cults that started to form after the reset, such as the worshippers of Baal, had some type of device for changing the weather and causing catastrophe. So, what if they had a method for doing the same type of deformity to the people that were their enemies or in their way? Because the main idea of monstrous beings is that these were the people that existed furthest from Christ and they needed to be condemned to an afterlife of torture and suffering. So remember what I said about doing this to their enemies. Now, there's a book called Marco Polo and the Encounter of the East and West that covers this process of labeling a past civilization as barbaric, cannibals, and monsters. And this is pretty crazy because I was reading this trying to learn more about monstrous beings, and then he starts talking about Tartaria. But this must have been at some point after the reset where they were told by the leaders of the church that the Mongols or Tartars were these monsters, that they were cannibals. But could this just be a cover story? Because they're using the same exact strategy of labeling them as pagans, just like they did with the Druids. Quote, "The traditional fearful Western view of Mongols inspired the name Tartars because they were believed to have burst forth from Tartarus, the infernal regions." End quote. To late medieval courtly readers, Tartars were considered a monstrous race, comparable to dogmen and Blemmyes. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I could dive into that deeper in a later video, but I wanted to talk about another possible answer, which is symbolism. It's no secret that secret societies make use of occult symbolism. We know the elite work in symbols, and maybe this is some type of reference to possession. The headless one, or the brainless, one who possibly was taken over, hijacked, and then relabeled as savages. Now, I do think that this is happening for many of these references, such as the Tartars and many other cultures, but they do make some clear references to deformities, so I wonder if this was really going on, and was there some kind of campaign to cleanse the old world of magical creatures and the demonic monsters that once existed in our realm? So what do you guys think? Is this just some made-up fantasy? And if so, why would they do this? Why did these famous historical figures believe in such things? Is there something else going on? Give us your thoughts in the comments, and let us know what you want for the next Cryptids Unveiled. If you guys could tell a friend about us, it really makes all the difference. And also, check out our Discord, IG, and email if you want to send us a message. Hope you guys have a wonderful day, and may our minds be unveiled.
Let go of everything you think to be true. Relax the mind and ask the question, do I truly understand what this reality is?